Hello, hi everybody. Welcome to another live episode of Visual Studio Toolbox. I'm your host, Robert Green, and joining me today is Douglas Starnes. Hello, Douglas. How are you?
I'm great, Robert. How are you?
Great. I love the decorating job you've done in your office. Very festive. I actually, looking at the keyboard, I should have asked you to play the theme song, but
Oh, I actually, for some reason, even though all the audio equipment that I have, I cannot figure out how I can stream and do music at the same time. I can't figure out how to do that.
So today we are going to talk about Visual Studio Code. You're going to show us using Visual Studio Code with some Python, with some Azure.
Mhm.
We all know that Visual Studio Code is a great developer tool, and obviously Visual Studio Toolbox, it represents the Visual Studio family of fine developer products, but that name was too long, so we just used Visual Studio Toolbox. So we're going to see some VS Code today, which is awesome.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then what are we going to see? And then let's dive in.
All right. So I'm Douglas. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon if you're on the East Coast of the U.S., or maybe even good evening, depending on which part of the world you're in. But again, I'm Douglas. I am from the Memphis, Tennessee area. So Memphis is in the extreme southwest corner of the state of Tennessee, and I'm actually in the county to the east of Memphis, but still not too far from civilization. My day job is I say that I'm a professional explainer. Actually, somebody dared me to put that on my LinkedIn, and I did, and it actually kind of took off. But that actually, I'm an author, and I'm not sitting around, writing, waiting for inspiration for the next great American novel. Instead, what I do is I produce educational materials for software developers and technology professionals. So I do a lot of work with Pluralsight. I got about what is it, about 8 courses on there right now, I believe. And then also I'm doing work for a company, Python specific company up in Canada called Real Python. I just published, I think it was last week actually. I think published my 4th course with them. Outside of that, as far as community activities, I organize events. So several user groups here in town, the Python user group and the .NET user group. I'm both involved in helping to organize those. And there's also, before the pandemic, there was a Xamarin user group. And I'm going to, and regardless of what the status of whether we meet at the local Microsoft office here. Beautiful office, was only open for like 4 months before the pandemic hit. So it's virtually brand new still. And but regardless of whether or not we can go back, I'm going to start the Xamarin group up next year. Also conferences. So small virtual conference called TDevConf, the Tennessee Developer Conference that a couple of friends and I started last year to give when all the events were getting closed down. We started this up to give speakers and attendees and sponsors and whoever wanted to still participate in conferences time. And then also Scenic City Summit, which is generally held every year in person in Chattanooga later in the year. We're hopefully going to go back to in person next year. And then also, I am a Microsoft Most Valuable Professional for developer technologies. Python is what got me in, but anything that's developer related with Python or developer related with Microsoft, I'll generally talk about. But I do give preference to Python. Yeah.
Excellent. So what are we going to
Okay.
see today?
So what we're going to look at today is I'm going to look at Visual Studio Code will be the star of the show, and I'll talk about the Python support in there. So the fantastic Python extension that exists for Visual Studio Code. Look at how it supports virtual environments. Write a very, very brief Flask app so that you can see how the editor and the debugging experience is, and also just very briefly the testing support. And then we'll switch over and we'll look at some pre-built applications and how Azure supports. So, for example, deploying to the app service, and then of course the PostgreSQL, which is a very popular database when you're working with Python, and then also Azure Cosmos DB. And if we have some time, there's a fantastic service. The reason that this is time permitting is it's still in beta. It's still not GA for individuals yet, but GitHub Codespaces, which is basically Visual Studio Code in the cloud. And it's absolutely fantastic. It's actually changed my entire opinion of my entire workflow for development.
All right.
So
That's
with that,
We only have an hour, so let's
Okay.
dive in.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so is my screen up?
Uh, yeah, it should be. Can't you switch over to it? Or I can switch over to
Yeah,
it.
I think,
There
yeah,
we
I
go.
think you,
There
okay,
it is.
yeah, there we go. I thought you had, so,
I did. I had to click a
okay.
button.
So first of all, I do want to say that everything I'm going to talk about, there is a free tier of it. So, so in case you weren't, as far as the Azure services, now Visual Studio Code, Python, those are free. But as far as the Azure services, there is a free tier. If you so for example, I'm going to talk about the Azure database for PostgreSQL. You can get that free for a year. Web app, the web app service, you can get those free forever. Cosmos DB, you can get those for, you can actually get a tier of that free forever. So if you don't have an Azure account, you can go get a free one, and you'll be able to get started with that. So first of all, I just want to talk about the Python support inside of Visual Studio Code. So if you're not familiar with so first of all, one of the things about Visual Studio Code, I actually had a chat several weeks ago with somebody on the team, and they said that the most commonly requested feature of Visual Studio Code is customization. And I tell people, it's kind of a backhanded compliment, but that Visual Studio Code out of the box, it's kind of useless in a way, because it's really nothing more than a text editor with some syntax highlighting, Git support, and an integrated terminal. It doesn't really do a lot out of the box. But that's actually a good thing. It's actually a happy problem in this case, because there are over 30,000. Let me see here. Let me pull this up here. 30,000 extensions for Visual Studio Code, and you can customize it to do practically anything. The only thing that I can't get it to do is Xamarin. So if you'll notice here, the top one is Python. I always love to point this out. 46 million downloads, and actually that's almost twice as many as the second most. This actually has changed in the past couple of weeks. Actually, C++ used to be the second most, but if you look, 3 of the top 4 are Python related. The Python community has completely embraced Visual Studio Code. So I've already got this installed, and what I'm going to do is start off. I'm going to open up my terminal, the integrated terminal. I am using a Bash emulator here, but you can use anything. So you could use PowerShell if you wanted to. You could even remote into a WSL instance. But at any rate, I'll change into my source directory, cd into my Visual Studio Toolbox directory that I've got set up here, and I will create, whoops, if I can type, a virtual environment. Take a few seconds here. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about works exactly the same across Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. Visual Studio Code is, of course, it's not even a .NET application. It's written using Electron and TypeScript. Okay, so I've got so what I want to do now is I want to open up an instance of Visual Studio Code inside of this directory. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say code-r for restart, and then a dot to say open in this directory. Okay. And I did the wrong one. I did it wrong. Okay, great. Nice job, Douglas. Okay. RMFR, the joys of live coding, even though no matter how much you rehearse this. Okay, so let's do this. Make directory hello Azure. Okay, so cd hello Azure, and let's just do that again. Okay. And I've got the latest version of, by the way, I've got the latest version of Python from the Microsoft App Store installed here. Okay, now let's try this again. Code-r dot. That's what I expected to see. Okay. So one of the things that you can do in Visual Studio Code is you can associate an application with or a workspace or a directory with a virtual environment here. And the way that you do that is Control-Shift-P. I confess I work most of the time on the Mac, so if I say Command by accident, I mean Control on Windows. But Control-Shift-P on Windows, Command-Shift-P on the Mac, and I'm going to look for this command here from the Python interpreter, this select interpreter. And when I do that, it's going to search my machine for all of the virtual environments that it can find. Now, this supports the virtual environments, the vend module that comes with Python. It also supports conda virtual environments, and it also supports pipend. Now, you can scroll through the list, but generally, it will try to find one that makes the most sense. And in this case, that's going to be the one that I just created here, and it's got a little star and says recommended next to it. Now, you'll see down here that it has selected that one. If I wanted to select a different one, I could click there. But now when I open a new terminal with control backtick, you'll see that it has activated. It's run the activate script for me. And this is really cool because, like I said before, I'm running a bash emulator here but if I decide to create a new terminal with, say, PowerShell, what it'll do is it'll find the PowerShell script for me automatically, and it'll do the same thing for the command prompt and such. So that's something that's helpful. Now, I'm going to create a small little Flask application, so I'll do a pip install Flask. I'll take just a second. And then I will create, and I'll create my the file that I want to use for app.py. Open that up. That's Control P, Command P on the Mac. And then as I start to you'll see that I've got my IntelliSense. It notices what packages I have installed. Used to, you had to restart to get this. From Flask, we'll import Flask. And then I'll create an instance of the app. In case you're not familiar with Flask, it's a web micro framework. I could use Django, but Django won't let me work with non-relational databases, and that's one of the reasons. And this is there's also much less code involved. I'm going to create a route.
You have to install anything to get Flask, or is that just?
Yeah, right down here where I did pip install Flask. That's all I needed to do. That'll give me access to the module up here. So I'm going to create a route that maps to the root of the site, and then I'm going to create a function that will handle by default GET requests. Now, I want to return some HTML, so I'm going to want to use an external file of some kind, and there's a function in here called render template that will do that. Now, normally I would need to import. Normally I'd need to include render template up here, but notice Visual Studio Code says, "Hey, I see that there's a function here that matches what you've typed that I can auto import." So if I just hit enter, it'll auto import for me, which is very, very handy. So I'll go ahead and say index.html. I'll go over here, create a new folder. By default, it wants to see the templates folder. Create my index.html file and h1 hello vs toolbox. Okay. At this point, I could go down here and I could set up my environment variables to run this, but there's support for running this inside of Visual Studio Code, sort of the F5 experience like you get in Visual Studio for Windows. So if I go over here to this tab, this run and debug, I could just tell it to run this file, or what I could do is I could set up a configuration. So if I wanted to have multiple different scenarios for running this file, with a create, so I'm going to create a launch.json file. And it's going to say, "Hey, I see that you have a Python, that you're trying to run a Python application." And it's giving me several different options. In addition to Flask, Django, which is the most popular web application framework, Fast API, relatively newcomer, but I love it. It's got the best use of Python type hints I've ever seen. But I'm going to go ahead here with Flask, and it's going to create a configuration for me here. And you can definitely edit this. So if you wanted to run on a different port, you could add the option for another port, something like that. I'll just leave it at the default 5000. The app, you'll notice that I have an app named app running inside of a module named app. That'll become very important here when we deploy this to Azure. But for right now, I'm going to hit F5 to start debugging, and it'll run my application. Down here in a few minutes, it will say that I've got a URL I can punch in here, and hey, guess what?
There we go.
So So, but now, and I guess I should also preface what I'm going to say is that the applications that I'm writing today, the code is nothing special. Again, Visual Studio Code is the star of the show, and I want to get as many features in as I can. The application I'm going to deploy to Azure here in just a minute is much more interesting, but let's do something else real quick. Let's take a look at debugging support. So let me get my notes up over here. And there's a common pattern in Flask apps. What we do is we create a factory function here, and we actually create the app inside of there and then return the application. And then this will come in handy when we see testing in just a minute. So app equals create app. Okay. Let me see here. I'm going to cut a couple. I'm going to cut around. Yeah, that'll work. I'm going to cut this. And I'm going to create a new route. And this one, what it'll do is it'll simply accept a parameter X, and then it'll add X to 1. And then what it'll do is it'll send X and the result of incrementing X by 1 to a template, which I will also create here. Call this out.html. And then inside of that, the only thing I'm going to do is, so basically what's happening here is passing these as keyword arguments, these values as keyword arguments. In render template will make them available as variables inside of the template. So this is just going to print what, 2 plus 1 equals 3 if we pass in 2. All right, so in this case, what I want to do is maybe I want to inspect one of these values or something beforehand. So I'll set a breakpoint here, and I will run this again, and it started. So I'll go over here to say inc 7, and it'll stop, and I'll get a debugging experience. Very similar to Visual Studio. I can hover over variable. I can view the current state of the variables over here. I can step over just like I would in Visual Studio Code, continue, and then we have our expected output. So there's that debugging experience. There's also test support built in for testing. So there's a framework for testing Flask applications called Flask Unit Test. The two most popular Python testing libraries, PyTest and Unit Test. There's great support for testing those with Flask. Let me see here. Pip install Flask Unit Test, I believe is what it is. Okay, and let me bring in just a little bit more code here. So I'm going to bring in another route that adds 2. And actually, that's not the right one. Hang on just a second here. That's actually it is the wrong one. It's got an error in it. It's got an error in it on purpose. I almost copied the right one. Come on, VS Code. There we go. I say such nice things about you. You should. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, so actually all that I need. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to create another file called test.py. You could have a more sophisticated structure, of course, in a production application, but in that file, I'm going to put my unit test here. And the unit test is simply a class that derives from the client test case from the Flask unit test. Unit test is actually included with the Python standard library. And then I've got two test methods in here. They're prefixed with test, and one of them will the client is an instance of the it's a testing instance of the Flask app. So get will make a get request to this URL. It'll get the response back, and then it'll check to see if a particular value particular text is inside the response. Of course, if we add 1 to 7, we would expect to see 8, and if we add 2 to 7, we would expect to see 9. So with that, what I can do is I can go over here to my testing panel, and I'll tell it to configure Python tests. And it's going to say, okay, what test framework do you want to use? I'm going to use unit test because Flask unit test relies upon unit test. It's going to ask me what directory contains my test. So my test file is in the root directory. What pattern do I want to use? So I can just say teststar.py here, and it's going to go through. It's going to find all of the tests. So it found in this Hello Azure project, inside of my test py, inside of my test the app class, it found 2 unit tests. And I can go up here and I can run both the tests. Of course, the first one is going to pass. The second one's going to fail. Why? Well, it's because this is subtracting 2, not adding 2. So now I can go over here, make the change, go back to my test, make sure, okay, it runs. Let's run everything, make sure I didn't break anything else. There we go. So again, very, very quickly, that's the testing experience included inside of Visual Studio Code for Python. Okay. If there are any questions, will I be able to see them here or?
So far, no questions.
Okay. Oh, we got a troll that needed to be blocked, but
you can see him in the comments section.
Yeah. Okay. So let's slide over to Azure really quick. Now, I don't know who out there absolutely loves the Azure portal, and it's what, they wouldn't have it any other way than using the Azure portal. I'm sorry.
I like it.
Okay. Well, I like it too. I mean, I like it too. However, it can be information overload. Because it shows you absolutely everything. And it's actually to the point where sometimes I use the CLI more, the command line interface for Azure. And one of the cool things about Visual Studio Code is it gives you what you're going to use most of the time. The things you're going to use most common. And actually today, I'm not going to look at the portal at all. Everything we're going to do is done inside of Visual Studio Code. I'm not saying that I try to avoid using the portal. I'm just saying that in the case of Visual Studio on Windows a couple of years back for IntelliSense, what they did is they had it by default it would show you only the most commonly used members. For IntelliSense, you hit dot and it would autocomplete with only most commonly used. That's kind of what I see Visual Studio Code as in comparison to the Azure portal. It's showing you what's most commonly used, and then if you need to dig deeper, well, absolutely, you go into the Azure, absolutely go into the Azure portal. So, but at any rate, this is there are a number of Azure extensions for Visual Studio Code. So you can see here the app service, which we'll see, virtual machines, functions, something that I will not have time to go into today, but it's super cool. Machine learning, I'm just gonna oh no, it's not what I wanted. Static web apps, that's something I've recently really gotten into. But at any rate, what I want to have the app service. So the app service is basically the way we're going to deploy use to deploy this web application. As you can see, I've already got one here. A lot of things today, there's gonna be kind of a little bit of hand waving, kind of the cooking show technique, because resources on Azure can take time to create. And we've only got about 25 minutes if I want to leave time for questions, so I better go ahead and get started. So, any rate, you could do this through the portal, but you can also do all what I'm going to show you through Visual Studio Code as well. So if I hit plus, say create a new web application, and it's going to ask me some questions to configure a new web app. Now, I actually don't like to use this one. This is actually the simplified way. I like to go into Command Shift P, create new web app, advanced, because this way I get to choose the resource group, I get to choose the region, and it'll use defaults if you just use the simplified way. So this one I'll say VS Toolbox tool. Hello. VS TOOL box. We'll say 3. The resource group, I've got this resource group right here, so I can delete everything and not have any thing hanging over that'll eat up my quota. And then several different stacks here. You see we got .NET, Node, PHP, Python. 3.8 will work, even though I'm using 3.9 here. Again, like I said, it'll ask me to select a region, which it does not do over here. And then if you use the truncated, the more express version, it will create a web app and a app service plan for you. But this one I'm going to use ones I've already got. Now this one you can, what is P? Not sure what you're talking about. If you could if you could expand on what you're But anyway, this one, like I said, it's going to take some time. So I'm going to, oops, actually, wow, Azure's having a great day. Regardless, now one thing I will say before I deploy this is if we go back over here, remember that I put this app inside of that the application that I created was named app, and it's inside of a module named app. If you do that, Azure Web App Service will automatically recognize where your app is located. Otherwise, you're going to have to configure it. But if I go back over to my Azure panel and I say deploy to web app, it's going to say which folder do you want to deploy. I'm going to use Hello Azure here. It'll say which web app do I want to use. I could use VS Toolbox 3. I'm going to use Toolbox 2. It's going to say it'll overwrite anything. And then if we look, skip for now, and we'll see what's happening over here, and it'll zip everything up. Also notice that I've got a this should still work. While it's deploying, I'll show you what I should have done. I actually should have created a pip freeze requirements.txt. I think this is still going to work. A requirements.txt file that will list all of my dependencies. And but since I've already deployed this same app actually to this application, to this instance, it should have those dependencies already. So let's see here. Give it just a few more seconds. And if I deployed the requirements.txt along with it, you would have seen it. If it didn't have those already, it would have said that it was we've gone through and installed all of those. It's the same thing as if you were to do a pip install -r requirements.txt. Okay, great. Let's see if this worked. And it put it on the wrong window. Awesome. As always. Okay. Sometimes if I do it immediately, it doesn't actually work. It has to give it a little bit longer to start. Come on. There we go. So, and if I and all my other stuff. So if I go to Inc. 7, everything. So that's how that's all that it takes. I mean, that was what probably 15 minutes. And granted, the app, it's not the next Gmail. It's not the next. I'm sorry, it's not the next Outlook.com. But still, it shows you how look at all the features we were able to go through in just a few minutes.
James, okay, good question.
Yeah, when you deploy the app service normally, no, as you saw here, when I told it to create the web app, and we'll just go through here and then here, then it asks me to select a runtime stack. And that's when I had to select Python. So so there's other languages, Java, Ruby. Now there are ways that you can. So there are a number of languages here that you can select. Yeah, good question.
Thank you, James.
Okay, let me. Come on. And like I said, that is what everything that I just did there. You do not have to shell out any money for. You can actually, after we're done here today, you can go and try it. Okay, that was okay. Okay. So let's take a look at databases. So here is like I said before, one of the most popular databases used with Python is PostgreSQL, and Azure supports PostgreSQL, and this is just the PostgreSQL that you know and love. So it's not a Microsoft specific, it's not an Azure specific, it's just PostgreSQL. So if I go over here to my Azure portal or my Azure Blade or what extensions, and I go over here to my subscriptions, you'll see that I have some databases, and I have one here already created. But I'll go ahead and show you what's going on here. So if I click on Create Server, it'll ask me. There are several different types. So there are several different types that are supported here. We'll look at this one here in a minute, but I could create an Azure, or rather a PostgreSQL server. It'll go in and give me a name, VS Toolbox. In here, it'll ask me what tier do I want, what SKU, how powerful do I want this thing to be. Ask me for an administrator username. Okay, fine. DAS, my initials, admin, cannot contain. That's right. Okay. I'm not actually going to create this one. So And then a resource group, and then the region. Like I said, I'm not going to create that. This actually does take about 3 to 5 minutes to create, so I'm not actually going to do that one. We're going to just use this one here. Very, very briefly, the application. Whoops, the application itself uses SQL Alchemy, which is an ORM, which is kind of the API of the ORM follows the Django ORM. So if you've used Django, you'll see that you'll see SQL Alchemy is very familiar. And if you go down here, I've just got a couple of routes. The idea behind the demo, I call it Conference Barrel, and it's for finding conferences, scheduling conferences, managing conferences. All we're going to do today is be able to do is list them. But I've got a route here with a template that lists all of the conferences that I have in this database, and then a form to create a new conference, collect all the information, put it into this conference model object that I've described up here that has the information about the conference, and then put stuff in the database and stuff it into the database and save it. And then down here, a way to find a specific conference by ID. Also, yes,
the source code in your GitHub.
I can put it up there. I can certainly put it up there. I have no problem with putting it up there at all. It's so simple. I didn't think anybody would really care about it, but I'll definitely put it up there. Again, like I said, the star of the show is Visual Studio Code and the process that you go through. But I've also got over here, because I want to show you that this is just the PostgreSQL that you already know and love if you're already using it. So I've got a file over here called security that I'm not going to show you because it's got passwords and everything in it. But however, I've got a dictionary called locals, and I've got a dictionary called Azure. So local will go to my local PostgreSQL database. And actually, that's one time that I am going to have to leave the portal, but it's not on Azure, so it's okay. I'm going to have to leave Visual Studio Code, but it's not on Azure, so it's okay. So I'm going to go ahead, and I believe I have this set up to where I can run it from here. Yes. Okay. All right. Let's grab the. Actually, can't I? There we go. This is all it looks like. So if I create a new conference and I call it local Postgre conference, and we'll say home. Yeah, 199 works, and we'll say that it starts. I don't know. It starts tomorrow. That's fine. Submit it. Okay. Everything works. Now, if I go over to PG admin, that's not what I wanted to do. So I should have this open already. I thought I had this open already. Okay, hang on just a second. We'll do PG admin. While we're doing this, while we're waiting for this to start, because it does take a long time. I had this start and I accidentally closed it. But at any rate, I'll change. Oh, here we go. It's actually already up. Okay, so.
Good day. You should play the lottery.
Yeah, I know. Okay, let me in. Okay, if I go over here to my databases and this one here, and there's only one table in there. And if I look at this one and all rows, there it is, local PostgreSQL, local Postgre conference that we just created. Now, so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the connection string. That's all this does. It changes the connection string. I'll save this. It's automatically reloading, so I'm not even restarting the application. All I'm going to do is go back to the home page, and you'll see that we have nothing. And that is because in our database on Azure, where is it? There it is. We have in this VS Toolbox tables. If I no, I don't want to delete it. I want to. Oh, so I'm sorry. I've got to go to this one. So there's actually another. This is not actually a Microsoft extension here. There's this PostgreSQL Explorer, which I can use to get to actually look inside of the database, and you'll see right now that there's nothing in there. However, if I go over here and I say Azure Postgre Conference, which I actually could have just used, and we'll say that is on Azure. and we'll make the ticket cost $100, and we'll have this one start tomorrow, and we submit it, and there we go, same thing. But now if I take a look over here, select top 100, there we go. So that's all you have to do. You do not have, I mean, literally, you do not have to change any code at all except the connection string. Okay, let's take a look.
From Ludo. It's a question from Ludo about the security module.
Oh no, okay, so security. No, that's not Flask security. Flask security is an extension to Flask, and actually that's kind of a aggregation of several different extensions, including Flask login and I think Flash admin and some I don't remember the exact list. No, let me go back over here. No, security, that is merely two dictionaries. One of them has the credentials for my local PostgreSQL account, and the other one has the credentials for my Azure PostgreSQL database. And by switching between them, local and Azure, this is my way of not exposing my passwords to the internet. That's all that I'm doing there. No, I'm again. So like I said, if I open this up, all you would see. Well, hang on just a second. Hang on, just let me see here. Actually, all I need to remove is the password. That's all it is. And of course, there's a password there normally, but that's all that security is.
Great.
Okay. All right. So I won't save that. And I will save this, and I will. Okay. So I quit the application, so I'm not going to get any port conflicts. Okay. Let's go now, and let's talk about. Yeah, it's fine. And let's now talk about MongoDB, or actually Cosmos DB. And so you may be familiar with, of course, PostgreSQL is a relational database, so it creates tables, and you do create relationships between foreign keys. And there's also NoSQL, or in this case, MongoDB, which is document oriented, in which you basically throw JSON, conceptually throw JSON. Throw JSON documents into collections, groups of JSON documents. I mean, your 90-second crash course on MongoDB is you have databases. Databases are groups of collections, and collections are groups of documents. Documents are basically JSON. It's a much simpler. I'm not going to go into the differences between the two, but what I'm going to
so what's a perfect example of when you would use that versus a relational database?
So relational database is anything. So transactional data, when you're talking about data that has relationships, when you need to create those kinds of complex relationships, when you just have data that's rather flat, that's when you would use document oriented. So think about things like sensor data. You've got sensors that are taking a reading, temperature readings, every minute or something, and you just want to keep dumping that in constantly. There are a number of different scenarios, but those are kind of the low hanging fruit there.
Okay.
Now, to get started with MongoDB on Azure, you could spin up a VM and you could install MongoDB on it and everything. You could do that. But you could use Cosmos. Now there is, or at least I don't believe that Azure offers managed instances of MongoDB like with PostgreSQL and SQL Server and MySQL and Cassandra. Actually, they don't with Cassandra. Cassandra is supported by Cosmos DB. But at any rate, Cosmos DB, however, one of the cool things about it is that it supports multiple APIs. So it supports a SQL API, it supports a Cassandra API, there's a graph database, and there is also MongoDB. So what I could do is I could go in here and I could, as you saw earlier, it says Azure Cosmos DB for MongoDB API, and then we'll go through and we'll do some of the same stuff that we did earlier, but I'm not going to go through that here. I will say that once you create a database with a particular API, you cannot change it. So in other words, you can't have a database use multiple APIs, but the service itself does support multiple APIs. So in other words, I've got this one here that does support MongoDB. I can't change later and say now I want to switch and use the Graph API, or use them both at the same time. You can't do that. Okay, so here I'm using a client called, I'm using a library or package rather called PyMongo that is actually created by MongoDB. This is not created by Microsoft. So this allows you to connect to any MongoDB database, not just Azure. And then I've also got, in this case, and I'll show you why if we get to look at Codespaces, why I've got it done this way. I've actually got my credentials this time stored in environment variables. And so I don't expose them. I've got them in a .env file. For some reason, Visual Studio Code does not like this, and it worked fine last night, but this morning it's not working. But at any rate, the exact same routes that I had before. The only difference is the way that I am storing the data. Instead of creating a model object that I had before, I'm just stuffing it into a dict. I'm just stuffing it into a dictionary, and then insert one, and then down here find one instead of doing some kind of a query on a relational database. I will say there is also Mongo Engine, which is what they call an object document mapper, which has an API that is similar to that of the Django ORM, much like SQL Alchemy has. However, it works with MongoDB, and so you could create a model object there, and it would sort of enforce a schema onto MongoDB, but by default, there is no schema on MongoDB. But anyway, let's go ahead and run this. And I've got this set up right now. I've got local, and I've got Azure, and I've got an instance of flat out MongoDB. What I'm running here is pure MongoDB. And this one, I actually have to do Flask run here. Now, Flask also comes with some command line tooling. And Flask run, what it will do is it will look for an application named app in a module named app and run it. Okay, so if I go over here, okay, so here we have again nothing because we're running locally. If I say I'm gonna do local Mongo conference, again we'll say home. I think the cost $199. We'll start it tomorrow. We'll submit. Okay, great. And if I open up MongoDB Compass, which is a tool that is again distributed by MongoDB. If I look at my local database, and if I look at
and that's outside of Visual Studio Code, right? That's not an extension.
Yes, but it's not Azure.
Right.
It's not Azure. That's my caveat. It's not. Oh, I got the wrong. Did I get the wrong one? Is it? Oh, I put it in the wrong one. I guess. No, hold it. What happened? Hold it. What happened? Oh, VS Toolbox. Oh, hang on just a second. VS Toolbox. I was looking in the wrong one. There we go. But anyway, there's the one that we just created. Now, again, to go on to look at if we want to look at Azure, all I'm going to do, we can here. Hang on just a second. Let me pull this over here. I'll show you. Actually, it's so small it doesn't matter. You won't be able to. That password goes all the way out to here. But as you'll see, locals just localhost, whereas Azure it's a MongoDB connection string. So if I change this and I'll save, the application will restart. No, it won't because I used Flask because I didn't start in debug mode. Never mind. Okay, I will go back home, and this time there will be nothing. New conference will say Azure Mongo conference. It'll be on Azure. Ticket cost, we'll say what, 200, and we'll have it start tomorrow. Submit. Oh
no.
What?
Document does not contain shared key at PK.
What did I do wrong? Oh, hang on. I'm using the wrong. Just a second. I'm using the wrong one. I'm using Conference Barrel. I'm using this one. Hang on, just a second. Okay, hang on. Try this again. There we go. No, that's not. It should be on Conference Barrel. Oh no, that's right, because that's when I didn't clear it. That's when I did earlier. Okay, this is okay. And to prove my point, here we go. I'm looking now in the Azure, looking over here in on Azure actually, And if I look inside a conference, come on, don't make me a liar. Come on. There we go. There's the conference that we just created. And like I said, they're stored in JSON. I was messing around with it beforehand, and I didn't clear everything out. And there are, and here's the other cool thing. You know, I said that we don't have to leave, as far as the Azure stuff, we don't have to leave Visual Studio Code. That we could also the local resources. So I could go into here and I could add. I don't have to add. You know, I could add my local PostgreSQL database here. And I could also go into even this right here. I could actually add. I could say I'm sorry. I want to attach a database, and I could attach a MongoDB database right here. And now we can take a look, and we can see this VS Toolbox, and there's what I just created, the local Mongo conference. Actually, about a year ago, I created a course for Pluralsight about MongoDB, and I used this exact extension as the client for part of the course. So, and there's other cool features. So there's a cool feature in here called scrapbooks that you can basically use to create little JavaScript snippets to interact with. It's kind of like a Jupyter notebook, and that's one of the things I didn't mention earlier. Is that Jupyter Notebook support built into Visual Studio Code, so you can actually run Jupyter Notebooks inside of Visual Studio Code. You can connect to a compute instance on Azure Machine Learning to you know, so if you want GPUs or something, then you can to run your Jupyter Notebooks as well. Got a few minutes here. Let's take a look at. I'm just going through. Yes, it is Visual Studio Code. Let's take a look real quick at where'd my other browser go? Where's my other browser? This one right here. There we go. I actually put this second one, the NoSQL one, the one that uses MongoDB, into a GitHub repo. And notice that I don't have that .env file up here. However, inside, I'm still trying to. I still have where I'm getting the environment variable for the Azure Azure credentials. Now, there's something really cool that you may or may not have heard of. Let's see. Let's do GitHub Codespaces. Like I said, this is unfortunately, at least last I checked, not available for individuals in GA. You can sign up for the beta, but I don't know if they're allowing people into the beta or not still. But if you take, I love this little demo here because what it says is that here's your Visual Studio Code on the desktop that we've been looking at so far. GitHub Codespaces is Visual Studio Code in the browser. And what happens is a small Linux virtual machine will be provisioned in the background, and it'll automatically be configured to work with a specific GitHub repo. This is not completely free. I believe while it's in beta, it's free, but it is not completely free. There is a charge. But what's really cool is that you can set this up to where after like 30 minutes, it'll automatically sleep any code spaces that have been idle for 30 minutes. So it's really cost effective. So at any rate, I've got this over here. I've got, nope, I got to go back to the code. If I go over here to this drop down, of course, here's where you can get the URLs to clone it and everything, or open it in the desktop or download the zip file. But if I go to Codespaces and say new Codespace, I want you to see how fast this spins up. Again, this is something I have not prepared ahead of time outside of creating the repo. Well, and the secret, which I'll show you. And while this is, and it has to spin up a few more things. But I want to show you, oh shoot, github.com. Should have done this here. Remember, I had that environment variable that I needed. And if I go into settings and over here to secrets and Codespaces, I can set secrets that will be interpreted, that will be seen as environment variables inside of the code space. So I've got one here with Azure, and all I've done is I've made the value of it to be that MongoDB connection string. And I hope that this is the part that I had just earlier this morning. Codespaces may have been having a bad day and wasn't working exactly right. Again, this is in beta. It is in GA for enterprise and teams, I believe. But I've got my requirements.txt file, so I'll need to do a pip install -r requirements.txt. Come on. That's not okay. That was something that was ARM. I don't need. Okay, I don't really care about SQL tools for now. And I can go over here, and this is the part that wouldn't work earlier. So keep fingers crossed. Go away. Keep your fingers crossed. No, not what I want. I don't want. Come on. Will it work if I do it like this? Oh.
All right. Well,
Unable to open launch JSON. Shoot. Come on. Let's try it one more time. Here, hold it. Is this going to work? Is it going to work like this? Here we go. Okay. So notice what I had to do that time is I did have to tell it I was going to create a Python configuration. I can go to Flask like before. Same exact thing. Same exact thing. I'm going to tell it app here. Now, here's the cool part. I'm going to start this. And if I look over here at ports, it's going to say it's forwarding this port 5000 to an actual address. So if I open this in the browser, it's connecting to the forwarded port. And it can't be. Oh, I told you it's having a bad day. Come on. Oh, hold it. Come on. Hold it. I have to make it public, I think. For visibility, public. Hang on. I think maybe I have to do that. Now let's try. No, come on. What's going on? Okay, I swear this has worked in the past. Let's see if this one works. Okay, well.
All right.
Well, that would again, like I said, this is in beta. But and the cool thing is a lot of the extensions. So, for example, I could install that Azure extension over here, and I could access my MongoDB, my PostgreSQL, the debugging experience, the testing experience. It all works. So, and again, I'll just go ahead and reiterate: you can get started with this stuff for free. Everything I've done today, with the exception of Codespaces, you can get started with for free. Again, the database for PostgreSQL, the Cosmos DB, and the app service. You can all get started for free.
All right, so let's wrap up. So what we've seen is a big surprise. Visual Studio Code has tremendous support for Python, for Azure. We've seen it in all kinds of other places on the show, the Jupyter Notebooks. It's a fantastic tool.
Yeah, and like I said, a lot of the stuff that I was showing that was Azure is not Python specific. That'll work with .NET. It'll work with Node. There's just it's an absolutely, and like I said, 30,000 extensions. Just absolutely incredible, and you can basically make it do what you want. Like I said, the only thing I cannot do with it right now is Xamarin. I'm hoping Maui will solve that here in a couple months, and I will use solely Visual Studio Code for everything.
All right. So thanks so much for coming on the show, Douglas. Really,
thank you for having me. I appreciate it. It's a lot of fun
stuff. So hope you guys enjoyed this, and we will see you next time on Visual Studio Toolbox.
All right. Thanks, everyone.